A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
A conversation I know you'll want to lean in a little closer to the radio to listen to the finer points of what we'll talk about over this coming hour, especially if you happen to be a Christian believer who gets into a conversation now and then. And maybe it's a personal conversation, but it might be at work. It might be something that happens between you and your employer. When someone has offended feelings on a whole range of what we might describe as woke issues, where you might want to get to know someone like our next guest. In fact, the number of cases of what has become known as lawfare are on the rise. There are activists who want to shut down the Christian voice by making official complaints and taking Christians to court. Well, in one of the latest cases, you might have heard us talking about it, Dave Pello, the Church and State Summits founder, he faces a complaint now that will see him dragged before the Queensland Human Rights Commission, accusing him of racism and vilification and hate speech, when he said welcome to country was contrary to the Bible. The legal battle is because he replaced a welcome to country with Psalm 24 verse 1, which reads, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein." Well, on the upside, these developments have sparked something which I think is pretty special, and I'll draw attention to it through this hour. It sparked a fundraising campaign to defend Christian believers who are dragged before the courts. And the list is growing. An opportunity to get some insights into that growing list and what it is that's sparking all this offence. Well, John Steenhoff is our special guest through this coming hour. He's the principal lawyer of the Human Rights Law Alliance. He's on the front line of the battle for freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. John Steenhoff, a special welcome along to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. It's great to be with you here this morning.
John, the Human Rights Law Alliance, some listeners may never have even heard of you before. You're quietly and determinedly working behind the scenes when we're hearing, that there's another Christian who's been dragged before the courts. Give us a little insight here into the work of the Human Rights Law Alliance, because I think getting our conversation underway for listeners to understand what you do might be very important.
Thanks, Neil. The Human Rights Law Alliance is a not-for-profit law firm operating out of Canberra, but doing work in all of the states and territories of Australia. We're a small team, but we're here to defend religious freedom and freedoms of speech, thought, conscience, and association. And what we do primarily is to run litigation. That is, when a Christian gets in trouble, and that trouble is because of their faith. Even when an everyday Australian gets in trouble for doing things against their conscience, or where they get in trouble for freedom of speech, we will take their case. We have a network of lawyers. We have alliances with various experts who we use in our cases. And we can help them sometimes to resolve the matter without having to go to court. That's always best for everybody. But sometimes we need to go through court cases. And we take those court cases for Christians, and we try to win them.
Now, I want to bring money into this conversation early, because if you're going to be fighting a legal battle, usually lawyers are not inexpensive. In fact, it can be very expensive if you have to engage a barrister. This latest case involving Dave Pello, the founder of the Church and State Summits, one of the good things I might say, and I might encourage listeners to really get on board with this and where you can participate, because there's a fundraiser that's going on now for the Human Rights Law Alliance. And a goal has been set, $1 million goal, raising money to be able to help people, Christian believers who are dragged, and we might say quite unfairly, before the courts, but there is a legal price tag on that, $1 million goal. There was a tremendous movement towards getting things started just last week. How do you see things going with that, John? I mean, you're on the receiving end of what will happen here with a fundraiser. How do you see things developing?
Well, Firstly, I'm just humbled at the incredible generosity of everyday Australian Christians who responded to Dave Pello's telethon and have given, I think the number is now, $165,000 towards the defence of David's case and the defence of many of the other litigation cases that we are running. So money is very important in these matters. Oftentimes when Christians get in trouble, they are faced with an opposition by a party that is very well resourced, very well funded, and has the ability to go long in the litigation, be very, very involved in running it in a comprehensive way. Our aim is to go to get our clients in a position where they can go toe-to-toe with the opposition and where the case is right to run it comprehensively with the best barristers, the best experts, and making the best legal arguments. Now, you're right. That's not cheap. You know, a top-flight barrister or a team of lawyers working on this can cost between $10,000 a day and $15,000 a day in court. Some of these matters run for 3 to 5 days, sometimes 12 days, and for every day in court you need, as a rule of thumb, 2 days of preparation work for that hearing, not to mention all of the work that goes in organising the submissions, the witness statements, the expert reports that need to go in beforehand. So this is not a cheap endeavour, but it is a worthwhile endeavour because when we win cases, we don't only get justice for people like Dave and our other clients, we get protections in law for everyday Australians as well.
John, it's a battle that's worth fighting. But let me ask you, I mean, right from the outset here, because this is the sort of comment I occasionally hear, this sounds very unfair. That someone who's complaining about a Christian and they're making a complaint, the Christian is then compelled to defend themselves and they have to form a legal argument and get a legal team around them. But oftentimes the complainant actually pays nothing at all. Or if they do have legal expenses, the state is covering those. Can you give us an insight here into how unfair some of this sounds?
So there certainly is an imbalance there, and there's many places in which that is unfair. There's a system that we've got increasingly in our Australian legal context of the government setting up tribunals which sit at sort of below the court level, and the aim of those tribunals is to give a more informal and a more immediate way of resolving disputes around these grievance issues like vilification, when you have a discrimination claim. The problem is that encourages what we were talking about before as lawfare, the use of these courts, of these kinds of processes to shut down ideas that people hear that they don't like, that are out of step with whatever the fashionable ideas are on issues such as life, marriage, sexuality, and identity. And yes, it can be unfair because the instrument of the state, these tribunals and all of their resources, are directed and pointed towards somebody who's made comments about their genuinely held beliefs, about their conscientious objections to certain kinds of conduct or matters. And there is a definite mismatch there. Now, there's been plenty of people over the years who've gone to our politicians and said, look, these systems are not working. They are being used to target Christians. They're being used to target ideas that people don't like, even held by non-Christian people. But it's difficult once these tribunals are in place, once these systems are in place, to balance them in a way that's going to be more fair. So what we're doing is using the courts to do that.
Now, governments put these systems, these tribunals in place. Are they weighted in any way politically? Is there an imbalance here? Is there something here that, say, just take for example, there's a Queensland state election coming. Dave Pello's been called to give evidence at the Queensland Human Rights Commission, and that's been set up by one of our previous governments. Ought there be something there in an opposition policy to repeal such things? Is that a possibility?
There's a lot of people working in that political space, Neil, and it's a really important place to be working in, because all of these tribunals need to be reviewed systematically to see if they're doing their job and if they are really achieving the outcomes that we want and that they were designed for. And in many ways, you can be sympathetic to the aim of these tribunals. They're there to try to resolve where people's reputations have been dragged through the mud because of, say, their race or their age or a disability. Those are all laudable goals. Now, there's a separate question as to whether a government tribunal is the best place to resolve these issues or whether there are other social instruments to do it. I mean, I personally think that these tribunals have shown themselves not well adjusted and not well set up to deal with these kinds of issues and have caused more problems than they solve. But you can see the rationale behind their setup. The other thing is that we have an interesting political situation where you have the left of politics, to the extent that that description still is accurate, which aggressively empowers and equips these kinds of organisations, the tribunals, the commissions that look into these kinds of matters. And when the right or the Conservatives get into power, they don't do very much to try and blunt some of the injustices or the imbalances that are in these tribunals. So at best, all you get is a stasis or a staying of the course on these things.
So when change happens, it's a matter of, it takes a lot of backbone, a lot of courage for any opposition party to either reform or remove those tribunals and therefore allow people to have at least a freedom of expression, a freedom of conscience is what we're talking about. Just before we take a break, the Dave Pellow issue, he's preparing to defend himself now before the Queensland Human Rights Commission, a complaint accusing him of racial and religious vilification and humiliation. The likelihood is here, I guess, that he's probably going to win ultimately, because it doesn't sound to me like a very strong case against him. But as so many people say, the process is the punishment. Is this what he's in for now over the coming perhaps years?
Well, Dave's case is at an early stage. We are optimistic that the case can be resolved very quickly. We have a conciliation coming up, and we're hopeful that we can convince the complainant to drop the case. We haven't seen what the full details of the claim are, but from our knowledge, it's not clear that there is a real genuine claim of racial vilification here against Dave, that there is a strong case at all. And we have serious concerns that the case doesn't even reach the threshold that it should have been accepted by the Human Rights Commission. However, it could go on for a long time. The process could be the punishment, and David could incur a lot of costs, a lot of stress, and a lot of distraction from his core ministry, which would be very detrimental.
Okay, well, it is a case, and it has sparked, it has triggered some emotion within certainly the Christian community who recognise the unfairness of what is happening here, and there is a fundraiser that is underway. And the goal is $1 million. And there might be listeners today who are thinking, you know what, I can get on board here and I can be supportive of this. I'm going to mention it a few times through our conversation that there is a fundraiser, and I'm going to tell you how you can make a contribution to that. And some have bigger capacity than others. There's going to be need for some big donations, clearly, because it's not just Dave Pellow. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of cases as our conversation goes on. You can connect at the hrla.org.au website. There'll no doubt be a link there to how you can make a donation. Or you can simply go to givesendgo.com/CAS-HRLA. So givesendgo.com is the website. Look for the CASHRLA. John Steenhoff is our guest, and I do want to open our talkback lines. You might have your own contribution to our conversation. 1-800-316-316. We're back with more in just a few moments.
There are many ways people listen to Vision, including in cars through the Vision app.
The Vision app is compatible with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so if you have mobile coverage, you can stream any of Vision's live radio channels in crystal clear quality and enjoy a growing range of on-demand podcasts, all on the go. There are other ways to connect your phone to your vehicle speakers too. You can see detailed instructions when you Google ways to listen to Vision.
However and wherever you listen to Vision, you can be sure that the announcers, programs and music will help you look to God daily.
Revival is sweeping across Australia, and station sponsor Bible League is providing vital resources to local pastors, evangelists and volunteers in Indigenous communities. For just $15, you can put a plain English version Bible in the hands of an Aboriginal Christian hungry for God's Word and the truth of the Gospel. Visit bibleleague.org.au/vision to donate today.
Visions 2020 with Neil Johnson. A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events.
1-800-316-316. We're talking about lawfare. And as you're listening, just perhaps a little more carefully than other days, hearing about the things that are going on, a reality check. Our special guest is John Steenhoff. He is the principal lawyer at the Human Rights Law Alliance. John, let me ask you about some of the cases that are coming before the courts. There's one interesting one that little bit of an aside here. Billboard Chris and the E-Safety Commissioner here. Give us your insight here. Let's be brief on some of these and we'll get through as much as we can.
Sure. Well, Billboard Chris is a man from Canada. He has been running a ministry where he's not even a Christian, but he saw what's happening with our children and transgender ideology and was shocked and started wearing a billboard around, hence Billboard Chris. And on that billboard, it says, children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And he puts on Twitter his interactions with everyday people in America, in Canada, around Europe, talking about this transgender ideology and its threat for children. So in February of 2024, he posted on Twitter, on X, a Australian Daily Mail article. It criticised an Australian trans activist named Teddy Cook, who is a female who identifies as a man, and who was appointed to a World Health Organization policy committee on transgender issues. And in his post, he said, this woman, yes, it's a female, has been appointed to the WHO. And he said, people who belong in psychiatric wards shouldn't be making the regulations for people who belong in psychiatric wards. This is a political comment by him. It's in the area that he is politically active on transgender ideology and its dangers for children. But the Australian E-Safety Commissioner got a complaint and ordered that Twitter remove that post. It was considered to be the cyberbullying of an Australian adult. Why? Because Billboard Chris supposedly misgendered Teddy Cook, calling her a female, even though she identifies as a man. And also he suggested that trans identity is a psychiatric illness. On that basis, the E-Safety Commissioner took it down under our Online Safety Act. We are challenging that. We are sitting alongside the X-Corp, Twitter, where Elon Musk's legal team will also be challenging it, because we don't think that people's comments on the dangers of transgender ideology should be considered to be cyberbullying, and that Australians need to know about these things.
Okay, and the risk of leaving that short, because there might be lots of things to explore there, let's go through some of the other cases that you're working with. One of those prominent ones that's been going on now for a number of years, the case of Dr. Jereth Koch, and he's been subject to a disciplinary proceeding by the Victorian Medical Board. How does his case go? Because just last week he's had a day in court and the evidence is out there. Now I guess we're waiting for some sort of light or whether it's a good or bad decision. What's your understanding of Jereth Koch and where he stands?
Well, Jereth is a Christian doctor from Victoria. In 2019, the medical board investigated his social media posts when an anonymous activist made a complaint to them. This came out of the blue. Jereth had never had a complaint from any of his patients, any other doctors. And he was immediately suspended in 2019 and only just at the end of July had his 1 week hearing of evidence. So for 5 years he's been awaiting trial, unable to practice medicine. He's had to retrain, all because of the medical board's dislike for his posts on the internet about issues on life, so abortion, euthanasia, sexuality, marriage, transgender ideology. We had some very good legal counsel helping us down there in Victoria during our 5-day hearing. We had a fantastic array of medical experts on the subjects that Jareth was talking about. And what we're doing is trying to stand up for the rights of Christian doctors to be able to speak in the public forum, to talk about contentious issues that are contentious right now in society and where a Christian voice is needed without being shut down by regulators. His case is going to be the subject of closing submissions in October, and we expect in early 2025 to have a decision. So far, the case has gone really well and shows the importance of standing up for Jareth, because if we can get some significant wins in Jareth's case for the freedoms of doctors, it's going to make sure that our Christian doctors are not silenced, that they're able to speak about things that they genuinely and sincerely believe in. It's going to be an important case.
And as I've often said, important that when you go to the doctor is allowed to tell you the truth. And that just isn't the case if there's this sort of pressure, this coercion. Interesting that barrister Stephen Maloney is quoted as saying about this Jareth Cock case, this is probably one of the most important cases that's ever been put to the tribunal in the last 30 years. Is he exaggerating there, or is this so important for the medical profession?
So Stephen Maloney is a barrister who's been running these medical disciplinary cases for over 20 years. And he is a man with a lot of experience in front of the tribunal. That's why we got him. And when he says it's very important, he means it's very important. And it indeed is, because we do not want doctors being silenced from the public debate by a medical regulator unless what they're saying is detrimental to the practice of medicine in Australia, which this clearly is not when a Christian talks about their beliefs on when life begins, on abortion, when life should be ended, on euthanasia, about God's good plan for men and women in marriage and how that affects sexuality, about how that affects identity, the danger to our children of transgender ideology. They should be allowed to speak on these things and not be subject to this kind of activist-driven complaints and regulatory overreach.
John, another medical one that you're dealing with, Dr. Gillian Spencer versus Queensland Health, a respected child and adolescent psychiatrist at the centre of this one. Very quickly, what's her issue here?
So Gillian is a real hero of mine, Neil. She is not a Christian, but she is an average Australian mother. She's a very experienced psychiatrist, and she has seen the development of what's called gender affirmation medicine for children and adolescents in the Queensland hospital, and has been appalled at the way that she is being coerced to practice a form of intervention with these children that goes against her whole clinical instincts, all of her training, and forces her to push them down a pathway of medical intervention. So she's taking a complaint against Queensland Health. We're assisting her. We've got on board some very serious and good barristers and experts who are going to argue that doctors should be free to act in accordance with best clinical practice rather than having imposed on them the political ideology of transgenderism that is destroying the lives of many of our children in Australia. She has seen the clinic go from being established in 2017 to seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young children who are confused, most of them young women. And they're not being told that God has created them good, God has created them wonderful, that they have dignity in His sight. They are being told, if you feel like you are the opposite sex, we can help you to make that real in your life, and it's causing irreversible damage for them, and she's going to be challenging that, and we're helping her.
And I know you've got some fundraising going on now for expert witnesses. Lawyers at one expense, barristers, but then expert witnesses too. Some fundraising going on there. There is a fundraiser that's going on for the Human Rights Law Alliance, even as we speak. And you can make a donation to it when you connect with the Human Rights Law Alliance. There'll be a link there on their website, hrla.org.au, or you can go to the fundraising site givesendgo.com/CAS-HRLA. And as we said, the figure there is up over $165,000 right now, and your donation might make a huge difference there. We're coming back after the news. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. John Steenhoff is our guest. He is the principal lawyer of the Human Rights Law Alliance. Back with more after news. Let me ask you here, John, Matthew Squires and his battle with Avant Services, another one of those cases that you are right in the middle of.
Thanks, Neil. Matthew is a former Liberal Party candidate for Wyong in the 23 New South Wales elections. He's a devout Catholic, and he was disendorsed as a Liberal candidate because of his religious and political social media posts, which were critical of the usual things that get Christians in trouble: issues of life, issues of sexuality, issues of marriage. Now, after he was disendorsed, his employer saw the article in the newspaper that included some of his contentious statements like he supported the No campaign during marriage, that feminists who don't support the fight against transgender ideology are going to destroy their own movement, which was seen as misogynist. Effectively a hit piece in the newspapers. The employer saw that, and they terminated his employment on the basis of those religious and political views. So we took a claim in employment law against the employer. We've got a very good barrister, Paul Jeffries from Victoria, an exceptional employment law barrister who's assisting pro bono in the case. He actually has a hearing tomorrow in this matter. What we're trying to do is get all of the communications internally from his employer, which was a large woke corporation, that show the basis for them deciding to terminate his employment. We're having a fight with them in court about the discovery of that. It's important for us to see on what basis he was terminated and whether that was on the basis of his religious beliefs. And then we can go forward to a hearing and try to defend the right of Christians outside their work time to engage in conversations on these issues in the public square, on social media, on the internet, without their employer being able to come along and terminate their employment.
John, let me ask you, because part of our conversation today is about the cost of a legal battle here. You just mentioned Barrister Paul Jeffries. He's assisting pro bono in this case. That means he's not going to be sending a big bill to this particular Matthew Squires at the end of the day. But as I understand it, there's different levels here. You can be represented pro bono, that's like free of charge. There are some lawyers who offer discounted fees. And there's going to be some expert witnesses that are full fees. And, hey, if you want me to speak on your behalf, well, you've got to pay my fee. There's different levels here that might cost in a legal battle.
There is indeed. And we've been blessed that many of the barristers who we've engaged, many of them not even Christian, have seen the injustice of the situations our clients are facing and have been able to act pro bono. But very many of the barristers that we employ also, they have bills to pay, and they do this as a profession, and we don't expect things pro bono. We want to run these cases well, so we pay them, some of them full fees, and some of them give us discounted fees. And so it costs money, and we do all of this on donations. So I spend a large part of my time going around doing fundraising, trying to convince Christians that this is a good thing to support because we're making a real difference. Because I don't know if I told you this, Neil, but we win cases. We won a case for a foster couple in Western Australia who were told they were unsafe to foster. We took a claim, we won it. It protects all Christians who want to foster. We represented Lyle Shelton, the former head of ACL and now head of the Family First Party. He has been dragged through a court for supposedly vilifying drag queens for saying they shouldn't be telling stories to children. We ran a claim, we had excellent assistance, and we won that case. And that protects everyone. All Christians who want to speak about the dangers of trans ideology, the dangers of drag queens telling stories to children in public libraries. And that's why this work's important and why we need to pay good barristers to do the work so we can give protections for all Australian Christians.
Well, John, special honour to you because, yes, you are winning these cases and quietly working very hard behind the scenes to get these Christian believers through the courts, or those who are standing for some of the big controversies that have come because of Christian believers standing against things around issues of sexuality and gender and such things. Hey, let me just give listeners that challenge because, as you say, John, you spend a lot of time fundraising. It's a matter of where are we going to get some funds here to actually fight these cases? Well, an opportunity today, and it's going to take some, small donations, also going to take some substantial donations. And the encouragement is to be prayerful about how you can support the Human Rights Law Alliance. There's a goal of $1 million in a fundraiser. It's up over 165,000 at the moment. You can get a link for how you can make that donation at the website of the Human Rights Law Alliance, hrla.org.au, or at thegivesendgo.com/CAS-HRLA. Hey, there was a very big case that was fought and won just last week or the week before. Professor Joanna Howe. And Joanna was our guest and talking about her case. You've had some role to play in that as well. It was a very significant win that she had for free speech, especially for academics, an academic freedom win. How do you describe the Professor Joanna Howe case?
Well, firstly, Professor Joanna Howe is an absolute champion. She has breathed new life into pro-life advocacy, standing up for the most vulnerable people in our society, children in the womb, and standing up on the most important human rights matter, which is the lives of children that are lost in Australia to abortion every single day. Now, many of the people who come up against Joanna are not able to meet her toe-to-toe on the arguments that she raises. She's effective and she knows the science. She knows what's going on in abortion. She knows all of the ways that abortion is a scourge on our healthcare system in Australia. So instead of directly attacking Joanna on the arguments that she makes, what they've done is taken complaints against her at the University of Adelaide. So some pro-abortion activists took a complaint against her about some research that she'd done, about some submissions that she'd made on abortion laws that were being put through Parliament. Her university went through the complaints process. We assisted Joanna at an early stage, and she was completely cleared of the plagiarism allegation that had been made against her. In other words, that she'd stolen from someone else's work in making her submissions. But she has been the subject of repeated complaints, complaint after complaint after complaint, because if you can't silence someone directly by meeting their arguments, you can silence them by using processes against them, and that's what they've tried to do with Joanna. But she has not bowed to the pressure. She upped the ante against her university. She's got a lot of courage, a lot of chutzpah, and she took a workplace bullying claim against her university because they kept on taking and investigating these complaints, which were clearly malicious and vexatious. She's now reached a settlement with the university. They've climbed back from trying to force her to do a re-education course on research. They've climbed back from saying that they will accept all complaints against her. And that gives her some space and some air to be able to continue with her pro-life advocacy. It's a really good win for her and also a great example of how when a Christian shows courage, it can yield some really good results.
And we're talking dollars today too, and as Professor Joanna Howe indicated, the legal expense on her defending herself comes to somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000. And, of course, that's probably come from her personal, her own pocket. And no doubt that's probably additional to whatever support that she's received from other sources. But the cost here, it can be quite exorbitant, can't it? So when we're talking about $1 million goal for a bit of a fighting fund for HRLA, I mean, that can be extinguished fairly quickly with some of these cases. The cost is substantial, isn't it, John?
That's correct. So this year, we are expecting to see at least 3 or 4 major courtroom engagements. The cost of a day in court, with all of the prep and all the work that's done before it, can easily be $50,000 to $100,000. Joanna, in her case, we did not charge her. All of our work was pro bono, but she had other lawyers assisting her with the workplace bullying claim from her previous firm, and I have no doubt that that was money well spent, particularly for the result that they got. But yet these cases, they cost money. And increasingly, they're being used to try and silence Christians who don't have that money, and we step in to try to do the work to the highest quality and to get the funding to be able to equip that work and to make real changes.
And that's a substantial win with Professor Joanna Howe. And, of course, there's a push now that she has. She has aspirations to have some form of mechanism whereby vexatious complaints can be dismissed before they get to the point where someone is dragged before the courts. And no doubt that's more of a conversation to have on another day, because there's still some more ground to cover here and time is short. Let me ask you about the Giggle versus Tickle case, because this one is so serious and so serious a loss that there is the thought now that the word woman is completely meaningless in Australian law. Your thoughts here, John?
So for those who don't know, the evocatively titled Giggle versus Tickle case is a case between the founder of an app called Giggle for Girls, which was supposed to be a woman-only space set up by a female journalist who had experienced male harassment and wanted a safe space for women. That's the Giggle part of the case. The Tickle is a transgender-identifying man who identifies as a woman and is named Roxanne Tickle. And Roxanne Tickle had signed up for this social media platform called Giggle and then been kicked off after facial recognition software had seen this is a man. Roxanne Tickle took a complaint of discrimination on the basis of Roxanne's gender identity into the courts, and that's been into the federal court. And unfortunately, Roxanne Tickle was successful in arguing that it was discrimination, unlawful discrimination, for the Giggle app and for Sal Grover, who runs it, to kick Roxanne Tickle off that app. Now, that is a setback, because what it means is that women can no longer set up safe spaces where they can exclude men, both men who identify as men and men who identify as women. In my view, there are some serious issues with the case. There are some serious flaws in the legal reasoning. If you read the blog of Associate Professor Neil Foster from the University of Newcastle, he's already done a post on this in his Law and Religion blog where he says this case is going to be appealed, and I expect there's very good grounds for it to be overturned. But it shows the necessity of running these cases well, because one of the criticisms of the judge in this case is that both sides ran their case very badly, and when you run cases in a way that's deficient, it's going to result in some bad decisions. Now, the judge had most of his criticism for that of Roxanne Tickle, the trans activist who was taking the claim. But when you run these cases, you need to be well equipped, and that's what we're here to do, is to run those cases well. And we're hoping that in the other cases we run where these trans issues are at issue, we'll get some space and scope for Christians to be speaking truth into what is a contentious public issue.
And so, John, when you talk about an appeal, clearly that's going to have a legal cost, isn't it? And that's going to be quite challenging. But when you think of what is at stake with the loss that is already there, if there's not a win on appeal, you've got the Australian Federal Court, a very high-level court, that's effectively revised how being a woman is interpreted. And it's not along the lines of what we'll always be talking about on this program, biological reality. But it's become a matter of self-determination. So what is at stake here is huge, isn't it, for women?
Oh, absolutely. This is about whether women are able to have spaces where they are able to have only women in that space. It's going to have implications for sport. It's going to have implications for women's organisations. And we're seeing this already overseas. But even on a very personal level, here in Canberra, I have a daughter who plays female soccer in the under-18s, is already playing against young men who identify as women in that competition. And that's a safety issue, and it's a simple category issue. If you have women's sport, it should be played by women. And also it's a safeguarding issue too, because we need to be not helping people to try to make their body conform to what their mind thinks. We need to remind people that God has created them good and beautiful and wonderful, and that the best way to give honour and to be happy and to live a life of fruitfulness is to be satisfied with what God has created and called good in the body. And transgender ideology attacks that at its heart and is going to lead to a generation, particularly of young women, who are going to grow up and know that they've been sold a lie on this, and we're going to have to deal with the irreversible damage that's been done when they see that this just didn't give the outcome that they were promised and has let them down.
John, let's spend just a few minutes here, because it's very tempting to say all is doom and gloom, all of these things so bad. There may be some ways these things can be reformed or abolished, repealed, however you talk about those sorts of things. But I wonder if you've got any thoughts here for ordinary listeners, reasons for hope. Is there some optimism for Christians? Is there a necessity to go through these battles in order to see some light at the end of the tunnel? How do you see things for the future?
I'm incredibly optimistic, Neil. I think we live in a time where we have unique opportunities to give the better message of the gospel. I think we're already seeing that the inferior message of the world, one of self-actualization, of the internal view where we look inside ourselves and try to find meaning and reason, we're seeing the fruits of that in the incredible levels of depression, anxiety, of dissatisfaction in our culture, and Christianity has the answer for it. And I think these battles are really important to fight because we love God with our whole heart, soul, strength, and mind, and we want to love our neighbour as ourselves, not just our Christian neighbours. We're not just doing this for Christians, we're doing this for our Australian neighbours, because we want to see people have that freedom to speak, the freedom to be able to live according to their conscience, and the freedom to go against, without punishment, the fashionable ideologies of the day. And I have great hope that we can see the reform on these things. We can see some key legal wins through our cases that are going to keep that public square open for Christians to speak. The most important part of that is this: cases are not going to change Australia. Political advocacy won't change Australia. Only the gospel will change Australia. And there's no sense keeping the public square open unless there are courageous Christians preaching, speaking the gospel message, not just for the individual, but for society as well. The goodness of Jesus as Lord over all of these things is so important, and that's what ordinary Christians can be doing and often are doing in small ways, in ways that people may not see, but in ways that have a definite effect on our society. And the last thing that gives me optimism is that I've read the Bible, Neil, and I've read the last page, and I know who wins. And so I have great confidence in the Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, and that fuels the work that I do.
Wonderful to know that our hope in the future fuels this way that we can be diligent and expectant of good things in the present. Hey, this might be late in our conversation, but let's take a call from a listener who's called through. Well, it's a later call, but Katie is in Nil. Katie, welcome along. Need to be quick. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, hi, Neil and John. Yeah, sorry. There is a lot of fear around this subject, and I appreciate your conversation because I'll just give you just one example from my own personal life. I started a YouTube channel in February, and I want to talk about all these issues on my channel. And like last night, or early this morning actually, I saw a post in England where someone was getting arrested for something they posted on social media. And so... Yes. You know, I myself, I'll be honest with you, I have times where I feel like I can't breathe every day. Like my channel's still like, you know, under 1,000, right? And I'm planning to try and talk about more stuff when it gets over that, or maybe start a Patreon. There's a heap of things I want to do on my channel that I'm terrified of doing because of the way we've gone in this country. So I really appreciate the conversation you're having and even just the information that you've given out.
Katie, you're raising something very important here that I want to hear from John on for people who are speaking terrified of consequence. Should they be terrified or should they be guarding their words? Where's wisdom in all of this as well? Because no doubt there's a balance and you need to be wise and you need to pick the arguments and the fights that are going to be important. But a quick word here for Katie, who's trembling at the thought that she might be, in fact, open to some of this sort of litigation. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. You're not alone. There are many people who are feeling this fear. There are many ways to make sure that you minimise the risk, and it's a long conversation, but I'll just give you a couple of key points. The first is that you need to be talking about ideas and not people. There is a wise way to speak about these things, and we as Christians are called always to guard our words. And so we need to make sure we're not defaming people or speaking in derogatory ways about people. We've got to have a great concern and heart for people, even on the other side of us. I deal day by day and go face to face with many of these people, and they need prayer, they need love, even as we combat their bad ideas. But talk about the ideas. The other thing is to make sure that you are wise in the way that you speak about things. Don't just speak in a way that is going to impress people within your own small circle of people who believe the same things as you. Try and be winsome and try to win people and try to talk about things in ways that is going to not immediately turn people off, and that's really hard to do. And the last thing is to do it prayerfully, and if you get into trouble, then you contact us at the Human Rights Law Alliance, and we will try to help you if you have been courageous for the gospel.
Katie, thank you so much, because I think your fears there are going to be reflected in lots of different hearts, people who are listening into our conversation wondering how they engage in these challenging conversations. Katie and Nil, thank you so much for your call. Time has run out here. Keep informed at the website of the Human Rights Law Alliance. You might be even able to see some summaries of the sorts of cases we've been talking about over this past hour. hrla.org.au. And one last opportunity just to mention this fundraiser that's going on. And we were talking about Dave Pello recently. He's being dragged before the Queensland Human Rights Commission, and but he's sparked something that's very important, a fundraiser to raise some money to form something of a war chest, so that when Christians are accused of all sorts of things here and dragged before different commissions and tribunals, that there is a bit of a fighting fund in place. And there's $1 million goal. It's up over 165,000, and you might be prayerful about making a donation to that particular appeal. You'll get a link there on the hrla.org.au website, or go straight to the fundraising website givesendgo.com/CAS, CAS-HRLA. John Steenhoff has been our guest through this hour, principal lawyer at the Human Rights Law Alliance. John, a special honour to you. Keep your shoulder to the grindstone, and I'm sure we'll get an update sometime very, very soon and talk about some more cases. But thanks so much for sharing these things with listeners today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.